Today we are speaking with Daria Mashinuk, well known by most people here, but for those who don't know, Daria is the Director of Resident Services here at Briarwood. Daria, what kind of background, education, or experience do you need in the awesome job that we think you do here in coping with the changes which occur in our lives as we age? And secondly, what is your role as Director of Resident Services?
Okay. Well, I can say that I came to Worcester initially because I came to Clark University. That's where I graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology. And I did a variety of things after that, but a couple of things that I feel like best prepared me for my work here were, for one, being an instructor for some years at a center for people who sustain traumatic brain injuries. Not that most people at Briarwood have had that, but just that it gave me an experience of people, that particularly gave me experience of people dealing with cognitive changes, actually. And then on the more physical angle, I worked at the Center for Living and Working as a skills instructor, helping people with physical disabilities who, just as the movement toward people being more independent in the society was moving forward, I helped people who maybe had always lived with their parents and wanted to live independently, or people who had sustained an injury that caused them to now have a disability they had not had before, and to help them know how to live independently in the world, which was becoming increasingly accessible. So I then got a master's degree in counseling psychology, and came to Briarwood after that, and I've been here 21 years. So partly what gives me some valuable experience is years being here and learning through my experience with residents and staff and trainings I've had. I've had additional training in dementia training, dementia caregiving, so and other kinds of training along the way. So I think all those things have prepared me as I am for what I'm doing now. And my job, most specifically, my position at Briarwood, is to help people who are at the independent level of the community. This is people who come to live at Briarwood in the independent level apartments or the cottages, to know what's available at Briarwood. When they first come, I meet with people for an orientation visit usually. And then also to assist people whenever they're in transition, such transitions as health changes or changes associated with aging, and sometimes other changes. Sometimes someone might come here with support of family members, and then something changes for the family members. So changes in the support system can be another thing. So my focus is to help people in transition. And the goal is always at Briarwood to assist people in being as independent as possible in whatever level of the community they're living. So, so once people are living here, I may be helping people when they stop driving, for instance. Maybe they've lived in a cottage and stopped driving and need to think about how best to handle that, or other general kinds of changes, but I can talk about that a little bit more as we go along.
So what is the advantage of going to an apartment from a cottage or at the Elms or the Birches?
Mm-hmm. Well, so when if somebody moves to Briarwood and starts out in a cottage, they have maintenance taken care of in ways that was not taken care of when they had their previous home, and they have an emergency pendant, and they have 8 meals a month per person usually, although they can come to the dining room as often as they like. But so there's some help with meals. They have access to the van for grocery shopping at Stop and Shop, even if they have a car. It can be very nice in the wintertime to have the van pick you up at your cottage, take you to the grocery store, drop you off at the front door, heated in the winter, air conditioned in the summer, and then after shopping have help with loading groceries back into the van, and then once back at home having help unloading them to the front door. So, so people get some assistance in their cottages already with maintenance, the emergency pendant, which I can talk more about, and meals, and social activities at Briarwood. But say someone did stop driving or wanted to drive less, then they might want to consider moving to an apartment. They don't have to. And there's certainly been people who continue to live in the cottages without driving. But one of the things that might precipitate a move to the apartment is a desire for increased social contact. And so driving can be important. Driving or getting rides can be important for getting up to the main buildings. So a move to the cottages might be precipitated by a need for, or a desire for more ease in social contact. It might be that someone is ready to stop doing as much cooking or meal preparation or grocery shopping. And so when people move up to the Elms or the Birches, if they're at the independent level, they get 1 meal a day as part of their plan, their monthly fee. So that reduces the meal prep necessities to some degree, or to a good degree. Then I can say about something like safety and security. The emergency pendant, as everybody gets one when they move to the cottage or to the apartment, or to assisted living level. If somebody presses their pendant, as you know, then you get a call from the staff in assisted living who respond just to say, did you hit it by accident, or do you need help? If somebody lives in the cottage, the staff in assisted living do their best to get somebody, especially if it's during the day, there's a number of management staff around and they can call on somebody to go down and check on somebody and see exactly what's needed. This is if they don't talk to the person on the phone and conclude what's needed. If it's outside of regular business hours, they might contact the security guard, they might contact a manager on duty on a weekend or a maintenance person. But there's also the possibility that out of less staff being available in the other hours, they might just call an ambulance for someone. That doesn't generally happen. Almost always there's somebody that can be sent. But if you're in an apartment and you press the button, it's very possible that an assisted living staff would either send somebody from within the building if it was daytime, or during the night or off hours, because there's always at least 2 people in assisted living, might send somebody over to check on the person if they don't answer the phone. So it's a little increased speed of response and that kind of thing. That's on the safety and security angle. We also, if somebody moves to an apartment, have another piece of the safety system in place, which is daily safety checks. People in the apartments are expected to be at 1 meal a day, usually the dinner meal. They don't have to, but if they don't, then the way the safety check system works is they're asked to say, I'm not coming to dinner tonight, to let the dining room staff know that through the reservation line, just a message saying I'm not coming to dinner tonight. Or to tell the dining room manager on their way out the night before, I'm not going to be at dinner tomorrow night. We ask them not to tell the wait staff because they're running around and it might get lost in the shuffle, you know. Or they may want to say, call and say, I'm ordering a meal to be delivered. We can deliver meals on a daily basis if somebody has a medical need in the apartments. In the cottages, we deliver meals only on Tuesday and Thursday when the van is picking people up. So that safety check system, if somebody has not called to say, notified us that they're not coming, and if they have not ordered a meal to be delivered and they don't show up, then we have a system in place for checking on them later in the day, the security guard, if somebody hasn't made contact with them earlier. That's our backup system for everybody in the apartments. They have 1 check-in per day.
So it does sound like there are certainly advantages to moving to an apartment once you start to have more physical or cognitive needs.
Mhm.
But supposing you do see those changes, or have those changes, do you have to move, or is it possible to stay in a cottage
Mhm.
with those kinds of needs?
So that's a good question. Some years ago, I've been here 21 years. Just before I came here, there was a couple who lived in one of the cottages, and the husband was still fully capable of operating in the cottage. His wife, I believe because of some cognitive decline, but also some physical needs, was evaluated as needing increased services. And we had just built the Elms and had assisted living now. And the thought was, when people needed more care, well, if they needed assisted living level of care, they'd move to assisted living. That we were new to this. And the reality for that couple was, no, they didn't want to move. The husband had a big garden behind his cottage. The wife liked to sit outside her front door in the sun. And they had a daughter who was a nurse with the visiting nurses, and the family felt like they could work out a support system for their parents to remain in the cottage, which they did, until the wife eventually died on hospice after, I don't remember, a couple years of care. And then the husband lived on in the cottage for some years after that, and eventually lived right to the end of his life at the very end with hospice care in that same cottage. So it's called aging in place. That's the term in the retirement services industry. And people, if they have the resources, are perfectly welcome to keep living in whatever level of the community they're living in. We've had people move into cottages who really needed quite a lot of help, but they were able to access that help, and that's the level of the community they wanted to live in.
How do you find out if the needs do change?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, because this is a community, and one of the wonderful things about community is people are connected at some level each with each other. Sometimes I find out that changes are happening from the resident, him or herself. Sometimes I begin to gather that some changes are happening from family members calling me and saying they're concerned about something. Sometimes it's a neighbor or a friend or part of the network around the person. Sometimes it's just from seeing somebody on the campus and wondering if perhaps their needs are changing, maybe just noticing some increased use of adaptive equipment, or I'm aware that they've been in and out of the hospital. One major way that I become aware, but it's not the only way, is if somebody is hospitalized, because sometimes that's a trigger that somebody either needs some temporary help after getting out of the hospital or some more long-term help.
And you're always notified when someone goes to the hospital?
Not always. People are free to tell me or not.
Okay.
I am very interested to know if somebody's in the hospital, because then I can facilitate some services being in place if they need them. For instance, if someone sometimes somebody goes in the hospital and they figure they're going to be out that day or in a couple of days, but things happen, and they might be in longer. And when people are in the hospital, each day that they don't move around, they lose some degree of muscle tone. I forget what the percentage is.
5%.
Yeah, okay, you know. So say somebody's in the hospital for 4 days not moving, they could lose 20% of the muscle tone that they had before they went in. And they may feel ready to just go home, but usually a physical therapy eval in the hospital and or sometimes advocacy by the person, him or herself, or their family, will help precipitate a recommendation on the part of the hospital staff to have rehab services afterwards. Now, if somebody goes straight home and they have some home health care services, that typically involves somebody coming within about 24 to 48 hours. They're mandated to come within 24 to 48 hours to open the case. And then a physical therapist may come and evaluate whether the person needs that type of service, or occupational services, occupational therapy services, or nursing services. As long as somebody is getting some professional service from a home health care agency, they call it skilled service, they are eligible then to have a home health aide twice a week to help shower with safe showering. Now, say somebody really is eager to go home and they don't want to go to our Knollwood Nursing Center or any other nursing center for rehab. They can expect that they might get rehab services, meaning physical therapy or occupational therapy, about twice a week. If they go to our Knollwood Nursing Center, and that has to be recommended by personnel at the hospital in order for insurance to cover it, they get therapy twice a day. So it makes a big difference. They also have a doctor either on site or consulting, so that if something unexpected is happening or there are adjustments that need to be made, it's not a matter of leaving home and getting transportation to one's own doctor. So there's advantages to going to a rehab center. There's also advantages to going straight home. But it's important for the person to evaluate what levels of service they need. My role in that is that if I know that someone has gone to the hospital, I can have them just kind of on my radar. And as soon as I know someone's gone to the hospital, what I do is to notify our hospital liaison. That person has no power to go and grab the person and bring them to rehab, or to make any decisions, or even that person does not even have any ability to go and see the person until someone in the hospital makes a referral.
Oh, interesting.
So, if someone's in the hospital and the hospital, usually a case manager has been told by the doctor, oh, this person's going to need some rehab services, they would then speak to the person and say, do you have a preference of where you want to go? If the person says they prefer to go to Knollwood, and the case manager is always happy to know that somebody's a Briarwood resident, or they should be happy to know that somebody's a Briarwood resident, and then knows that that means they have a priority at Knollwood Nursing Center because they're a Briarwood resident.
Oh, okay.
That's less work for the case manager.
Sure.
They're not going to have to look around at a variety
Right.
of
Right.
rehab centers, you know. So if the resident or their family member says our first choice is Knollwood, then is when our hospital liaison is notified. And then it's worked out between the hospital liaison, representing us, and the case manager at the hospital. Is there a bed available? Does the person need a private room by virtue of having an infection and needs that kind of care? Or do they prefer a private room, and whenever possible, we try to make those available for Briarwood residents. So that can kind of happen, it seems, behind the scenes, but I'm usually in touch with that process. And if I know somebody's gone in the hospital, I make sure they stay on the radar, so to speak, of our hospital liaison, so that beds don't get filled up at Knollwood, and then somebody's ready to get discharged from the hospital, and unfortunately we can't accommodate them, because maybe we didn't know they were in the hospital in the first place. So the more notice we have, the better.
So it probably is advisable if someone goes into the hospital, that someone from Briarwood, that someone lets you know.
It is.
Yeah.
People don't have to do that, and they don't have to go to Knollwood. They have
Right,
choices.
Okay.
Now, if somebody goes in the hospital, for instance, and they're on Medicare, if Medicare is their primary insurer, and they don't get 3 overnights in the hospital, then insurance will not usually cover them to come to Knollwood. Under some cases it will, depending on what the insurer is, or what their general insurance health plan is, or some particular arrangements between certain medical services and Knollwood. But often it's not possible with fewer than 3 overnights in the hospital to go ahead to Knollwood and be covered by insurance. In that case, one option is to go to Fair Lawn Rehab Hospital. So we just recently, this week, had somebody who was in the hospital just on what's called observation status for 1 or 2 nights. And they were not formally admitted to the hospital. So they had no Medicare nights, overnights in the hospital, making them eligible for going to our rehab center. But Fair Lawn Rehab Hospital is a lateral move. It's a hospital to a hospital.
Oh, okay.
So this person went to Fair Lawn Hospital. In her case, she's probably just gonna be there for about a week, and then she'll go back to her apartment. In some cases, somebody might go to Fair Lawn Rehab Hospital just long enough, or a little longer, to get those 3 overnights and some initial care at Fair Lawn, and then they can transfer to Knollwood and have further rehab at Knollwood.
That's important information.
Mhm.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, supposing there are 3 or 4 people, 3 or 4 different people in cottages that decide it's time to go into an apartment.
Mm-hmm.
How would you prioritize who goes first, or
Mm-hmm.
is there a way?
Yeah. It's similar to the priority list that exists before people ever come to Briarwood. There's a list of people who've expressed an interest in moving to Briarwood, and when there's an opening, we take it from the top, and Carol sends out letters to people saying this is what's available, and moves down through the list. It's the opening is made available to the person highest on the list. We have a list of people who've indicated that at some point in the not too distant future, they think they might need assisted living or they might need an independent level apartment. And so they sometimes have actually looked at apartments, they don't have to, but sometimes they've looked at them, said, yeah, I want a 2-bedroom apartment, I only want the Birches, or I want a 1-bedroom apartment in the Elms. So we might have that additional information. And so when an apartment becomes available, we go down through our waiting list. It's called an internal move list. And we just take it from the top based on what we know people are looking for, and try to match up, lets people know what's available. And then if somebody isn't interested at that time, similar to the wider priority list before people move to Briarwood, they don't lose their place on the list.
Oh.
It just stays there. They can say no as many times as they want, just stay there on the list, they're not ready, and then we move down the list.
When someone new comes to Briarwood, or comes for an interview with Carol, and do you meet with them to decide what is the most appropriate level that they should be living, whether it be in a cottage or an apartment or assisted living? Or is it always up to the individual to decide where they want to live?
In some communities, typically life care communities, which Briarwood is not, there is more documentation and evaluation process. That might require, for instance, a doctor's evaluation. At Briarwood, we ask for medical information. However, the decision-making on people's suitability for a particular level of care, level of living at Briarwood, is primarily given to Carol King, who's Director of Sales. From her experience, she's been here longer than I have, and the information she gathers from the resident and their family. In some cases, family or friends, in some cases, she wonders if perhaps some further evaluation is necessary. And on occasion, she's involved Marla Prestone in that process, Marla being our nurse manager and director of assisted living. Not with the idea that the person has to move to assisted living, but just based on Marla's medical experience and her familiarity with evaluating people, because she has to do that for the assisted living level. Carol has on occasion called Marla in to help her think about what might be the best level of living residence at Briarwood. Now and then she's also consulted with me, but not as often.
Is there anything else that you think it's important that we residents know about your job?
Yes, I would say one of the things besides that we want to support people in being as independent as possible, is that this is a community, and based on that model, we very much are committed to working together. So sometimes people can have some, I haven't heard people expressing that recently, but sometimes people can have a fear that if somebody knows what their needs are, they're going to be kind of railroaded to move. And that really is not the case here. People have a variety of resources and support systems and desires and needs, and so we are available to help people move through what their needs are to the best of their ability, maintaining their independence as much as possible with our support. I see it as very much of a cooperative process. So it's not, we're gonna move in and say somebody has to do something in general. There are some provisions in the residence and care agreement if someone really was evidencing an inability to maintain themselves safely or to maintain themselves in a way that did not impinge on the needs of others, then in those kind of rare cases we could step in. But it's almost always been a cooperative effort where we work together. So I sometimes have residents coming to me and saying they're concerned about a neighbor. And they're saying, I'm not trying to invade somebody's privacy, and anything that anybody tells me is confidential. But it just gives me a little bit of window in my capacity to what might be going on for somebody. However, my commitment is always first to the individual resident. So for instance, I've had people, as they're getting into an ambulance on a stretcher, say, don't call my family. They've got a lot going on today. I hope to be home tonight. Under no circumstances are you to call my family. They're the boss. It's their life. If they're alert and oriented and able to make those decisions, I'm not calling the family. The resident is in charge of their own direction of their life. If I knew somebody had some cognitive compromise and might not be as capable of evaluating that completely, and if they've signed off on a form when they first came that says, if there's changes in my status, these are the people to contact, I would go ahead and contact other people and say, by the way, you probably want to know that your mother or father or aunt or uncle is on their way to the hospital. But my commitment is first to the resident. Yeah.
And it sounds like you are also an incredibly valuable resource to all of us. That, do you know where we can turn for help?
That is a good question. I encourage people, even if they're not in the hospital, if they are in the hospital, that's one thing. I can offer sometimes some advice from my experience about how to advocate for what they need or what the options are. But beyond just that kind of crisis kind of situation, when people's needs are changing, I can advise them about what Briarwood can do for them, what other services might be available outside Briarwood. I can recommend home health care agencies, for instance, or others who might be able to come in and serve them. People who are serving people at Briarwood already and have some experience with Briarwood. So that all is very possible, and I do have some experience that people have found valuable from my being here a while and knowing where to turn.
Well, on a personal basis, Frank and I certainly appreciate your help in finding for people coming from out of state, finding new doctors and et cetera.
That's right, you've turned to me for that.
And so we turn to you for that. Well, I think I can speak for all the residents in saying how much we do value your help and your services and you. And as our needs change, we know where we can turn. Thank you so much for giving of your time on this busy time, and I know you're always busy. It's not just at Christmas time, but thank you, Daria.
No, well, this was a pleasure. Thank you.